Hello, everybody. Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Tamsin Rose, the Senior Fellow for Health at the Africa-Europe Foundation, and you are joining us this afternoon where we're going to be discussing an Africa-Europe Climate Alliance for Clean Cooking Solutions. Why are we talking about clean cooking? Well, last night I made dinner for my family. It took 20 minutes. I used 2 pots. I always made pasta, so one had high heat and the other was a sauce, so it had a low heat, and I simmered the sauce. Everything was done easily, quickly. I served it, and it was done in 20 minutes. That's the reality for me every day. Clean cooking is part of my life. I don't even think about it. But for millions of women around the world and girls, it is not their reality. Instead, they have to go and find sources of heat. They have to find firewood or dung to cook over. As I was standing and breathing in the nice smells of the tomato sauce, they're breathing in deadly fumes that harm their lungs. Clean cooking should be a human right. And the question really for me is, why haven't we achieved this? It's such a basic thing that everyone should have the same right I do, to go into their kitchen, to be able to quickly make food in a clean way that's nutritious and doesn't harm them or their family's health. Here at the Africa-Europe Foundation, we've been working on that for a number of months because we would like to bring focus and attention to this issue that has been hidden for far too long. And we seek to create momentum to find solutions for change. We've been working on this with our high-level group, with our strategy group, and with partners. And we're delighted that we've developed a manifesto for clean cooking over the last few months. More than 65 organizations have signed it. But we're not going to stop at just a manifesto. Over the next few months, we'll be building the momentum and engaging other organizations so that when the EU-AU summit is held in early 2022, clean cooking is embedded in their conclusions so that this is no longer a forgotten issue. So that my everyday reality of being able to cook whenever I want conveniently in a clean way becomes every woman's reality, every girl's reality. This is what we're working towards. And I'm delighted to introduce to you 3 people who will take us through how the Clean Cooking Manifesto was developed, what it means, and why it's so important for health, for economic development, and for societies in Europe and in Africa. So let me start by passing the floor to Sheila. Sheila, take us through this. You're on mute, Sheila. Excellent.
Sorry about that. Good afternoon, good evening. My name is Sheila Oparaocha from the Energy International Network on Gender and Sustainable Energy. Before I start, allow me to mention that this presentation is a collaborative effort of Dymphna van der Lands, Dr. Kandeh Yumkella, and myself. In this regard, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we are honored to present to you today the Africa-Europe Foundation's Clean Cooking Manifesto. This is a collective action agenda for achieving universal access to clean cooking by 2030 that has arisen as an initiative of the Africa-Europe Foundation. Why is this manifesto timely, critical, and urgent? The evidence from SDG 7 progress tracking reports speaks for themselves and show that with fewer than 10 years until we reach 2030, the world remains off track to meet SDG 7, which commits to ensure access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy for all. Nearly 2.6 billion people still lack access to clean cooking solutions, and the COVID-19 pandemic threatens to reverse progress and further exacerbate inequalities. Equally challenging is that to date, the level of commitment and investments in clean cooking has not matched the global magnitude of the challenge. Considering the annual toll on human health, particularly women and children's health, forests, climate, and local economies, clean cooking solutions should be central to the global transformative strategies and to national and city recovery plans. 3 pillars central to this transformation are governments, development actors, and the private sector, who are urged to align with each other and to work with other stakeholders with a greater sense of urgency and innovation, elevating clean cooking within energy, climate, and development agenda. Next slide, please. Distinguished guests, the next 12 months are of critical importance. With the UN High-Level Dialogue on Energy in September, the 26th UN Climate Change Conference, COP26 in November, and the Africa-Europe Political Summit of Heads of States in February 2022. These milestones provide member states, CEOs, sector leaders, and other stakeholders an opportunity to make momentous progress on climate protection, health, the environment, women's empowerment, through ambitious commitments and concrete actions to achieve universal access to clean cooking, that in turn would be one of the most significant levers to achieving both climate and development goals. With this, I'm pleased to hand over to Dymphna to continue.
Thank you very much, Sheila. My name is Dymphna van der Land. I'm the CEO of the Clean Cooking Alliance. And like Sheila, we're honored to be here and humbled and inspired by the work of the Africa-Europe Foundation and the Women's Leaders Network to make sure that the issue of clean cooking is consistently and appropriately addressed and highlighted. And so as we start going a little bit more detail in the manifesto, what you see here is really what we think of the guiding principles of the manifesto, which is fundamentally embedded in ensuring that a just transition occurs that leaves no one behind. The manifesto really, and all its partners really feel that the global community cannot address the climate and biodiversity crisis without improving the way people cook. National governments must be empowered and supported to determine the transition path that best suits their local needs and their local context. And we have to genuinely engage all people across race, gender, geography, and income to develop equitable solutions that are appropriate for all. Next slide, please. So as Sheila mentioned, there are three elements that we want to highlight specifically and the role that they're playing. And we're starting off with governments. As you can see, there are three concrete actions that the manifesto calls for governments to take. The first one is to integrate clean cooking into NDCs, their national determined contributions, and national energy planning. The NDCs can create transformative change in the country's climate and energy plans and must include ambitious targets for clean cooking. NDCs should seek to be as aligned as possible to the Paris climate goals and the 1.5 degree net zero goals. Governments submitting their revised NDCs should ensure that clean cooking is fully embedded with robust targets to meet climate and development goals. Likewise, governments should engage in integrated energy planning that addresses the full suite of household energy needs, including clean cooking, to maximize health and livelihood benefits of energy access. The next point for government is that the manifesto calls on governments to create and resource the delivery units to deliver on these ambitious plans. These delivery units can lead and coordinate clean cooking efforts across agencies and departments, which very often, almost always, doesn't occur right now. It's very much an isolated event that doesn't get housed in one specific department at a government level. And so the manifesto calls for these delivery units to be created. They would promote the adoption of effective and robust policy frameworks and shape funding and actions where commitments exist. The international community must commit the resources, both financial and technical, to help national governments establish these delivery units. And then finally, for governments, the manifesto calls on them to enact favorable and, critically important, stable fiscal policies to sustain business growth and increase affordability. Governments have to support the development of a robust clean cooking industry through tax and import duty exemptions, accelerated depreciation, and smart subsidies that are directed towards solutions that meet both climate and energy access objectives. These approaches have been deployed with much success in the off-grid sector and the renewable power sector. Purely market-based solutions are unlikely to be sufficient to deliver affordable solutions at all the levels and speed required to achieve universal access by 2030. Given the multiple social and development benefits associated with clean cooking, deploying innovative supply and targeted demand-side subsidies is justified to enable wider access, as has been the case in the off-grid solar sector. Next slide, please. When we move on to development actors, the manifesto calls for them to support countries to develop appropriate policy frameworks and technical support to enable rapid growth of clean cooking solutions. Countries need to be supported, as I mentioned before, when developing national determined contributions and national adaptation plans. Both need to be representative of the current situation of clean cooking and need to make sure that they call for stronger help from the international community through climate finance for clean cooking solutions. The establishment of a resource center would help build an evidence base that easily translates into informed choices and support national plans that are equitable and based on effective regulatory environment and centered on the user. Critically, increasing the share of women policymaker and gender mainstreaming will further strengthen development outcomes for clean cooking interventions. Next, increasing funding to match the magnitude of clean cooking challenges has to be done by all development actors. Clean cooking must rise up the funding agenda, and we're delighted to see it actually is increasingly getting the attention that it needs as a priority within integrated national energy plans that includes a holistic approach to electricity as well. Funders should offer concessional finance and blended finance solutions to enable investments in clean cooking. And prioritizing more resources for clean cooking can help mobilize the resources and attention that is critical for influencing political will and commitment setting within national governments. The international actors should also focus on developing sustainable markets that deliver clean and affordable solutions. The sector must pursue different trajectories aligned to national plans, including immediately expanding access to proven clean cooking solutions, specifically greater electricity with and focus on LPG as a transition fuel for clean cooking, as well as a focus on ethanol and biogas as transition energy options, and significantly improving the quality and performance of improved cookstoves that deliver cleaner solutions to the poorest and most vulnerable populations. Crucially, and finally, the sector needs to increase investments at various stages of enterprise growth and greater engagement with industry actors to promote innovation and scale up. Results-based financing, including carbon finance and the use of carbon offsets, will be critical to addressing the funding needs of enterprises and the affordability gap for consumers. Resources for evidence-based research and evaluations must assure effective targeting of these activities. And with that, I will hand it over to Kandeh. Kandeh.
You're on mute, Kandeh. You need to unmute. Go ahead. No, you've muted yourself again. Good.
Thank you very much. Thank you. On behalf of my colleague, co-chair of the Energy Strategy Group, Connie Hedegaard, we want to thank the Africa-Europe Foundation and our many partners who have helped to make this manifesto a reality. We've received significant support from some private sector entities as well in developing this manifesto. We want to acknowledge, number 8, that we need to increase private sector investment in clean cooking solutions. This is important because we know governments do not have the resources required to give access to almost 3 billion people who lack access to modern cooking energy services. We need a lot of resources. And so we're very grateful that, in fact, private sector joined us in developing this manifesto. And everything that Dymphna has said about the role of governments is geared towards creating an enabling environment so we can attract private technology and private capital to come into this space. And of course, looking at effective public-private partnerships. Number 9, we want to build stronger partnerships with the electricity sector to advance clean cooking. This is important because we know already we've made a lot of gains in providing access to electrification around the world over the last decade. However, in most countries where they lack clean cooking solutions, that electricity access is not available for clean cooking. For example, in sub-Saharan Africa, apart from South Africa, 85% of the populations still use charcoal firewood and biomass for cooking. So we want to ensure that in planning of energy access programs and strategies in countries, we treat clean cooking at the same level as we do general electrification. Beyond that, we want to encourage utilities as they plan for expanding the grid, and also to those who are investing in mini grids, that we consider the additional power generation required to ensure that people can cook, use the electricity to cook. Of course, our ultimate dream is that that electricity itself is made from renewable energy sources. So embedding clean cooking dimensions in an electrification strategy is going to be crucial if we're going to provide clean cooking solutions to the 3 billion people who lack access to clean cooking. Number 10, we want to increase participation of women and integrate gender issues in the strategies and plans we have for both electrification and clean cooking. Why is this important? My professional training has been in agricultural economics, which I also taught at Michigan State University, but I live now as an honorable member of parliament in one of the poorest areas in my country. I can tell you that for some commodities, 85% or more of the processing after the crops are harvested is done by women for a number of crops. And several stages in the value chain all require heat solutions, and they rely on firewood and charcoal. So what am I trying to say? Gender empowerment, especially in poor communities in Sierra Leone, in Bangladesh, in some parts of India, require access to clean cooking solutions that are affordable and reliable to ensure, in fact, that these critical processes in the food value chain can be done in a safe way for the women. Also, we know it is very clear, as Sheila said before, it is the women and girls who collect the firewood. They also collect the water for cooking. Our dream, our vision is we make clean cooking solutions affordable and accessible for those who do not have it now, the same way we've driven electrification through mini grids and other off-grid solutions. Developing markets will be crucial, and Dymphna has covered that well. But remember, when we were developing markets for renewable energy solutions, indeed we had feed-in tariffs. Governments had to help create those markets for clean energy solutions, but also for energy efficiency solutions with all kinds of incentives. Dymphna has outlined it. We need bigger public investments to make this clean cooking solutions affordable and accessible. Yes, we have to talk about subsidies, smart subsidies to make them affordable. In my village, people still see the firewood and charcoal as cheap and free. We know their environmental costs, in fact, significant environmental costs. If we want clean cooking solutions, the markets to grow, we're going to need solid partnership with governments in the form of fiscal incentives for suppliers of the technology, those who want to invest in the solutions, but also demand side incentives, subsidies to make them affordable for low-income people. We want to thank all our partners who have helped put this together. What is next? Sheila mentioned, and I close with that. We need to take our message global. We need to take it global. I've spent 2 decades in this field. I'm very pleased to see that over 65 institutions have already signed on to this manifesto. We're so really pleased. Of course, we have to take it another level. We need to take it to New York in September, to the heads of states during the UN Energy Summit, first of its kind in 40 years. We need to take it to COP, because indeed, the use of firewood and biomass for cooking and heating is also destroying the forests, and of course, also releasing black carbon to the atmosphere. So we want to thank all our partners, but this list is the beginning, and we're really pleased. We're starting off at 65. Our dream is by the time we get to COP, yes, we want to see 200, maybe 500, even more institutions signing up and individuals. So to our eminent personalities, we're very pleased, Connie Hedegaard and I, and also Dymphna and Sheila, that many institutions have come together to put this manifesto together to give you a political, clear, simple 10-point political agenda. Finally, we're wrapping this up also in a new slogan to enshrine this ambition in the context of our drive for low carbon transitions. We're coming up with a slogan that is a slogan that says 40-60 by 2030. 40-60 by 2030. We call for a target of 40% for all households connected to the grid or off-grid electricity to be using it for clean cooking. That's our 40. Our 60 says we call for a target of 60% of those utilizing modern energy for cooking to be utilizing energy generated from low carbon sources by 2030. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that presentation. For Sheila Oparaocha, from the member of the Strategy Group for Energy and the International Coordinator and Program Manager at Energia. Thank you to Dymphna van der Lans, also a member of the Strategy Group on Energy and the CEO of the Clean Cooking Alliance. And finally, thank you very much to Kandeh Yumkella, the co-chair of the Strategy Group on Energy. You can see how carefully this manifesto has been developed. It's a 10-point political agenda, as Kandeh has just said. And they've worked out a plan, so there's a transitional mechanism to get to the point of full clean cooking. So there's been a lot of thought that's been put into this, and care and planning and attention to what is initially a very domestic focus. But again, Kandeh has highlighted to us how much agricultural processing also relies on charcoal. And so we would also have an impact on the value chain for agricultural products. So there's a lot at stake. And the transformative potential of getting this solution in place is enormous, particularly on the lives of girls and women, on our environment, on our clean air. But the magnitude of the problem hasn't had the attention it deserves. And that's what we're looking for today. We are seeking to mobilize champions. We want to find people who can help amplify, multiply the message, endorse it, and get more signatures on this manifesto so it can have the momentum that it deserves. I'm going to invite a number of different key people to come in, but I also rely on you, the audience. Please share your comments, your suggestions, your ideas about how we can raise the profile of clean cooking in the chat, and I'll have a chance to call on you. For those of you who are watching on YouTube, please use the hashtag Africa Europe Foundation to share your ideas and pass the message across. This is something that we need to get more people behind. This is a reality for far too many people around the world, particularly girls and women, and it can be changed. It should be changed. So let me bring in the first of our speakers who's going to respond to what they've just heard about that manifesto and the 10-point political agenda for change. And I'm delighted to introduce Jean-Paul Adam, the Director at the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. Jean-Paul, what do you think of what you've just heard?
Thank you very much, Tamsin, and good evening or good morning to everyone. First of all, the greetings from Dr. Vera Songwe of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. And her first message is absolutely to endorse this manifesto as part of moving forward in terms of climate resilience and also in building forward better in responding to COVID-19. I think too often the conversation around climate change is dominated by the race towards zero emissions. And the race towards zero emissions are obviously extremely important, and it's a goal that mobilizes the whole planet. But in the African context, we must make sure that the road to net zero is also the road that is the fastest to achieve zero hunger and zero poverty. And the question of addressing clean cooking solutions is very much part of achieving zero hunger and zero poverty. It's about building climate resilience, but also marrying that to the principle of sustainable development and of equity in terms of that development. The conversation around clean cooking is also critical as part of the conversation on a just transition, because certainly one of the first steps that will have to be taken, and this is recognized in the manifesto, is that LPG would be one of those transition fuels towards clean cooking. This is because it's widely available on the African continent. While it may initially be more expensive, it is something which can be upscaled quickly and which is part of the solution as we achieve base generation capacity around renewables and achieve that low carbon energy mix that we all want to achieve. The solutions around clean cooking are obviously also directly associated with achieving sustainable livelihoods. And one of the big issues around biomass-based cooking, for which so many people in Africa are currently dependent, is that it locks in low-value economic activity. And I think we've heard as well, through a few of the points made in the presentation, how increasing the opportunities for sustainable livelihoods are directly linked as well to providing clean cooking solutions and forms of heat which allow increased value addition and allow the formation of more SMEs, for example. This links as well to the opportunity to crowd in the private sector. And this can be done through a variety of instruments. We can de-risk those investments by using, for example, sustainable bond instruments that may be issued by governments, or even in some cases that can be issued in certain communities. And there's certainly ways in which we can channel those investments so that they reach the people that need them the most. I think it's also important that we have a conversation around carbon pricing and offsets. We know that even at very low prices of carbon available currently, if we were to connect 4.5 million people per year, we would be able to raise $240 million in carbon credits. And the final point that I will be making is the need to as well linking our solutions on clean cooking towards nature-based solutions, and therefore looking at creating livelihoods that are associated with nature. This can be through agroforestry, but also having versions of climate-smart agriculture that reduce the pressure on forests and on the natural environment, create sustainable livelihoods, and also link with sustainable energy solutions in communities which address the need for clean cooking across our societies. Those are a few of the initial reactions, and I look forward to engaging even more going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jean-Paul. And I note that people are starting to share their ideas and comments in the chat. That's very welcome. And I'll have a chance to bring you in a little bit. Let me now pass to my next guest, and that's Hailemariam Desalegn, the former Prime Minister of Ethiopia and the former President of the African Union. It's about time that clean cooking got the attention it deserves. What's your view? Is now the time that we can get the solutions in place to fix this challenge?
Yes, thank you very much. First of all, let me thank the Africa-Europe Foundation to bringing this agenda at the top of our discussions. I think this is an agenda which has been hidden somewhere, only for technical people to somehow design efficient cooking stoves or some other technical issues, but has not been given the necessary political attention. And I feel that this is a high moment where every one of us now gathered to bring this to the high table, including the suggestions that has been made to bring it to the UN, General Assembly, as well as to COP meetings, which is very important. But to me, again, each and every country, as I know from my experience as a leader of one of the African countries, it is very important to give focus on these kind of issues, because most of our people, especially women and youth, are so much affected by this agenda item, which is the clean cooking. You know, I was so much surprised when I read a report that says, I think we have given much more attention to malaria, tuberculosis, and other diseases in our health programs, that lots of money has been flowing to this sector, while this one is, air pollution through the cooking process is killing 3-4 times the amount of deaths we see in Africa. So I think this is an agenda which has to come at the top of our discussions, and I fully agree, and I just commend those people who come together and produce this manifesto, and that has to be, bought in by many leaders at this time. So the advocacy is very, very essential. Again, when it comes to governments, governments have lots of priorities. And one of the suggestions was to have a delivery unit, and you have to be very careful. You know, every agenda comes with a delivery unit as a solution. So I think how many delivery units one government can have is a very difficult proposition. And I suggest that you should be very careful in handling, you know, government and institutions should deliver because there are ministers and specific agencies and institutions that are supposed to do this job. So I suggest, you know, this should be a comprehensive approach where we have a delivery unit for climate change, and a delivery unit for agricultural transformation, a delivery unit for industrial transformation, a delivery unit for, you know, health services. And so I think we should bring this as one unit, and in every country, the cabinet should discuss on this issue as an issue of a top agenda, rather than, you know, having a delivery unit for each and every topics, which is very difficult to handle. This I say from my experience early on, and we did have a number of delivery units, which ultimately has not yielded the necessary result. So we should carefully see this issue. As my brother Kandeh said, the thing that we have, you know, universal access of electricity, especially lighting, to have in the rural areas of Africa and other developing countries, but it is only lighting. And in order to go for cooking, we need to have much more energy that should be supplied. And that is a little bit expensive. And therefore, there should be a solution where we have to make an affordable supply of electricity. When we are doing this, be it in a mini grid or from the national grid that connects certain areas, we need to have some kind of subsidy and that supports, you know, the rural community. By the way, when we talk about women and girls that are so much affected by this open fire cooking and the pollution and associated calamities, I think we need to understand that we need to bring more income to the women and girls because they are engaged in agriculture. You know that our women in Africa are the main producers in agricultural sector. And they are also the main actors in small and medium enterprises. So I think we need to comprehensively support women so that they somehow be sharing the burden of governments in bringing some money to this process. So income and economic empowering of women cannot be dissociated from this kind of advocacy we are doing. So I think we have to look this thing comprehensively, but the most important thing is governments should focus and should give due attention to this topic because it is the much more killer. You know, my experience is when I was a child, I was born in rural Ethiopia, and we had a riverine forest, which is huge, but recently when I went to my area, I saw that the whole forest has been destroyed simply because it is for solid wood for cooking. So I think if we give solution to this issue, it all means that we are also fighting climate change through our forests and sinking carbon into the ground. So environmental degradation calls for, you know, when you talk about African adaptation to climate change, it all means we have to afforest what we have destroyed. And if we don't have this solution, then we are going to go for another cycle of deforestation. So I think this is also very essential. Thank you.
Thank you, Hailemariam, for again reminding us the link between the clean cooking that happens in the domestic environment, the deforestation and the overall quality of the environment. And as you say, this is an issue that hasn't had the attention that it deserves so far. We've had lots of good suggestions in the chat, sharing of low-tech solutions, highlighting the importance of both the logistical challenges and the education and learning on how to use new low-tech solutions. And we've had a suggestion from a former ambassador, Mrs. Eunice Brookman, who has said, why don't we get the first ladies of Africa to come forward and say first ladies for clean cooking, and get their voices. And this has had some support also in the chat. Let me invite our next speaker, and all of our speakers were asked to be brief, just 3 minutes to give us their first responses so I can bring the audience in. I'm delighted to introduce Wanjira Mathai, the Vice President and Regional Director for Africa at the World Resources Institute. Now, we just heard from Hailemariam about how this issue, it isn't just private to the home. It links to land use, it links to trees, reforestation, it links to agriculture. It's all connected. From your perspective, how do you see the impact that the manifesto, if we can get the clean cooking achieved, what do you think the impact could be?
Well, thank you very much. And certainly the comments that have come before mine are apt and answer that question. But the thought that we still have 1.6 million people in the world still dying from fumes from burning biomass fuels tells you that there's a significant push on biodiversity and in many ways totally unacceptable. I endorse what the manifesto presents, and certainly what Jean-Paul mentioned about the opportunities for LPG to transition us rather quickly. It is true that we simply cannot achieve any of the development goals if we do not address this issue. And the more we continue to undervalue, and I must underscore, underfund, what is one of the most important, effective cross-cutting solutions, which is achieving universal access to clean cooking, it just demonstrates that the lack of solidarity, and we have got to change something. Obviously, the UN General Assembly, COP26 coming up, the UN high-level dialogue on energy, these are all important signals that something possibly is possible for clean cooking. But clean cooking has to be made a higher priority in all of these discussions. It has to be included at the national level, national climate recovery plans and investments in particular, because we know that giving everyone access to clean cooking is going to be one of the most important levers for climate and development. But we have to demonstrate that we actually believe it. We have a long way to go, but the good news is that this manifesto does represent a clear path forward. With sufficient cooperation, political urgency, we can get there. And I really appreciate the Clean Cooking Alliance continuing to play a key role in this ecosystem, continuing to drum up raised ambition and a coordinated approach across governments, donors, finance, civil society, just across the board in general. And of course, an enhanced alliance between Europe and Africa, really important in talking about the just transition, prioritizing access to clean cooking, and really getting granular about what is needed. But the question really is, how serious are we? Because this year I lost a dear friend, a friend who was an icon in the women's movement. Some of you know her. Her name, Dr. Margaret Snyder. We called her Peg. And dear Peg was the founding director of UNIFEM, and which became, I guess, UN Women now. And 6 years ago, when I told Peg that I was working on W Power and the Partnership for Women Entrepreneurs in Renewables, bringing women together to catalyze the clean cooking and the energy movement, she told me that 50 years before, 50 years earlier, she had been working on the same agenda. 50 years. How is it possible that we're still talking about getting women access to clean cooking, to clean energy? What's changed? What's new? So, ladies and gentlemen, during such a critical year for climate and energy, we really need intentional, bold, and trustworthy action. And I dare say solidarity, because it has to happen this time, that we might honor the memory of those who have been working on this agenda before us, on whose shoulders we stand, and to ensure that we really leave no one behind. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Wanjira. What a powerful message. I mean, we wanted to use this conversation to empower people, to inspire them, and to activate them to go out and be champions on this issue. And I think you've given us that very clear message. This is not a new topic. People have been working on it for 50 years, and we have not managed to achieve change, despite all the benefits. And we are accepting that 1.6 million women and children will die every year as a result of breathing poor air from unclean cooking. And that's quite unacceptable. It's time we do something about it. Let me now introduce Najma Mohamed, who is the director of the Green Economy Coalition. The world is getting excited about the green transition, and as part of the pandemic resilience package, lots of money and focus is going in these areas. How do we make sure that built into that, given equal priority to electrification and renewables, is clean energy?
Thanks so much, Tamsin, and I'm going to try and build on what's come before to add value. I think for me, what really stood out from the manifesto was this commitment to a just energy transition. I think our transition in our energy systems is probably the biggest challenge we face as we transition our economies. And what I really like about this movement is the fact that it's an alliance. And I think we're only going to land our messages when we start building alliances across agendas, across the climate, social, gender justice agendas. And I think this type of policy solution and innovation is the kind that I think policymakers and implementers dream of. The type of intervention that can deliver multiple benefits: energy access, health benefits, climate benefits, and environmental benefits in reduced deforestation. So I think that we've got to maintain this commitment to a just transition, not only in who benefits from this technology solution, but also how the technology is developed, manufactured, distributed, and financed. And I think we've got to pull that throughout the value chain. I think this is particularly important for Africa, where we know we're wanting to build more manufacturing capacity, and manufacturing in the green technological space is definitely an area where we don't only boost manufacturing capabilities and green manufacturing capabilities of countries, but we also start boosting intra-regional trade, which we know in Africa is the lowest in the world. So I mean, that's one of the first sort of reflections. The other one that really stood out for me is we often speak, when we speak about women and I mean, some of the horrific reality that we've had to face, that women and young children and girls have been affected, for decades. But as we look to the opportunities, I think it's important for us to look at women's participation, not only as beneficiaries of this technological solution, but also as active agents in the full value chain, in the production of fuel, of alternative fuels, in the manufacturing, in the maintenance and operation of these technologies. And I think that's taking gender justice as far as we can in this process. And I think it is one of the most transformative solutions that we do have. And I think probably my last point to share is for us to think about innovative and inclusive finance mechanisms. I mean, there was a stat from the International Institute for Environment and Development, I think in 2019, that estimated that only $1 out of every $10 of climate finance actually reaches local climate action. Here we have a solution that lands at the local level. I think it's important for us to land this agenda at the big international moments. But I also think we've got to start thinking innovatively about how domestic finance can also be mobilized. I mean, I had an incredible experience in South Africa once with a different technological solution around solar home systems in an informal settlement, not connected to the grid. And we were wondering, how do we scale this solution for more people in the community to benefit? And eventually we had a conversation with the local municipality, who then were able to identify local municipal funds that were targeted at energy access that could be used for installation of solar home systems, that we never connected, the dots. And so I do think that we've got to start thinking innovatively about finance mechanisms, because solutions like these have been in place for a long time. And what we really need at this moment in our transition, and has become out, I hope, of a very difficult period, is to reignite our economies and get them in the right direction. That's good for people, good for the climate, good for the economy, in an inclusive, in a just way, but also at scale. So my appeal would be that I think I'm at the point where I really want to see this incredible solutions that have been proven to take flight and go to scale. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Najma, again. And I really heard something you said that I thought was really useful for us to bear in mind, that this is the kind of impact that policymakers dream of. Clean cooking hits the social justice agenda. It hits the poverty agenda. It hits the gender empowerment. It hits the economic and revenue development. It hits the revolutionizing of agriculture. It hits climate and environment. It hits so many different places that it should be a solution that should be grabbed with both hands by policymakers. And we've had some conversation in the chat about whether part of the challenge is that it's seen very much as a women's issue, and because it focuses on women, and we need to see this as a broader issue that affects all of society, hits all of these key policy agendas that you explained for us, Najma. I'd like to bring in a few more people, and thank you for keep putting in your comments in the chat. We're getting a lot of strong messages of support for clean cooking as a topic, and that it's a moment that's come that really needs to address it. We're getting some conversation about some of the practical aspects of logistics, some of the technical solutions, talking about low tech, talking about financing. So there's some more elements that I'll be bringing in. But next, I'd like to bring in Tariye Gbadegesin, who's the Managing Director and Chief Executive of the ARM-Harith Infrastructure Investment Limited. Tariye, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. Thank you very much for having me today, and congratulations to the Clean Cooking Alliance and the rest of the team for the manifesto. Some very interesting concepts there, and I'm very keen to support. I run an infrastructure private equity fund focused on West Africa. And one of the areas we're developing is a climate infrastructure asset class. And one of the areas we're focusing on is clean cooking. But we manage private capital. We manage actually international capital and pension funds from domestic pension funds, which means we need to make a return. And so I'm going to speak from the perspective of private capital allocation in closing. But I will commence by saying that I appreciate, and I think we all should appreciate, that the manifesto emphasizes that we are, in many respects, in an emergency. We are facing an emergency with respect to the deforestation of African forests. Notably, somewhere around 50% of African forests are being depleted, predominantly for cooking. And interestingly, and we need to make a tie into urban sprawl, a lot of that biomass is used in urban energy. And so while the rural communities use biomass, the real pull on the resources comes from the rapidly growing urban centers across Africa, where a lot of the cooking is actually done using biomass. And this also worsens and escalates pollution. And this ties to the second emergency, which is pollution. I think it is incumbent on us to make the global community aware of just how serious the pollution levels are in African urban centers, and the fact that the transition fuels really do present a very near-term solution for addressing pollution and cleaner energy, especially in urban areas. And I think, I'll just finalize by saying, in terms of the rural areas, livelihood and cooking for livelihood and being able to increase energy intensity for livelihood also needs to be addressed. But where we do see interesting opportunities for private sector allocation to these problems is often in urban areas, because there's disposable income and there's economic activity. And what we find is there are great challenges with clean cooking in urban areas and great challenges with pollution. But we don't have enough data to show the transition from the status quo using LPG and transitioning into more electric forms. The reality is that it's going to be very challenging to go immediately from the positions we're in today into using electric forms in urban and rural areas. And the pathway does require some use of LPG. And the challenges that we have as capital allocators is that quickly LPG is not considered clean. It's considered, even though there's talk about it being in part of the just transition, the reality is that when it comes to Africa, it is really the most practical way for private capital to be allocated to solve the problem. And most times it will be allocated into the urban areas. There's also the issue of the bifurcation between rural versus urban. Some thinkers believe rural is the crisis, whereas others, fewer, are focused on the urban areas. The reality is that both are important, but we have to solve both with different potential solutions. I want to touch on innovation. The reality is that beyond the world of LPG, as we go into cheaper electric stoves, as you go into ethanols and various forms of alternative clean fuels, we need innovation and we need ideas. And we need this call for innovation around alternatives beyond urban areas into the hinterlands, where solutions such as LPG for the bridge would no longer be viable. I think one thing we all have to be careful of as a global community and investor communities is to approach development on a linear curve. Development happens in multiple curves. You would have solutions that work for cities, solutions that work for peri-urban, that work for agrarian communities, etc. And we need to have that combined approach to how we solve for the energy problem. And so let me close on the point of NDCs. The reality is that if governments are able to look at the holistic solution space for clean cooking and put those into their NDCs, then I think we'll have a bit more policy focus that allows the private sector have more confidence to allocate capital into some of these spaces. But the reality is that a lot of the opportunities that we as private sector allocators find are much more in the LPG space. And that is really just to put it bluntly. And I find that, I just want to throw out sort of one last thing. I think every DFI and every private allocator in Africa infrastructure and energy wants to invest in clean cooking. But no one can find projects. No one can find something that's totally bankable, that qualifies. And the challenge is really around this conundrum around LPG in the first instance. And I think that's something that just has to be addressed. But it is a near-term transition solution, and we do need to be thinking much further along. And for that, we're going to need innovation. And so let me just close on that point, but I'd like to thank everyone for this opportunity. It's great work. And I think it's a very important conversation for us to be having politically, financially, and socially. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And I noted that there is a strong interest from the private sector to invest in this area, the importance of it, but that there are gaps. We need innovation in many different areas. I like the fact that you said development happens in multiple areas, multiple curves, and we need to make sure we are feeding the pipeline for each of these so that there are the technological innovations coming through, even as we use transition fuels to get to where we need to go. So lots of great ideas on there. And if people have suggestions for bankable projects, we've clearly got some takers. We will be sharing in the chat the link to the manifesto, so you'll be able to download it and look at it, because we hope you to become ambassadors and champions and to pass this message on. Let me now invite Tracey Crowe to come in, the Senior Director at SE for All. Tracey, go ahead.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to participate today. The very informative presentation, for the compelling remarks from everyone, and really for being able to preview the Clean Cooking Manifesto prior to today. everything outlined is very well aligned with and certainly helps validate our own work on clean cooking at SE for All. We heard the statistic at the start that we have 2.6 million people globally without access to clean cooking. I think we all know that number. And while that number is bad enough, what's worse is that we've made such little progress over the past decade. In Africa, we have more people today without access than in 2010. So we've gone backwards. We've gone from about 760 million without access in 2010 to 917 million with the latest data as of 2019. And each year over the last decade has seen an increase. And this is in Africa, and this is just awful to see these numbers going up when we need to be seeing them going down. And part of the problem is we're not seeing any finance going towards that. And we saw that number at the beginning as well. I think 131 million, when we need to be seeing billions. So we're just not rising up to meet the challenge that's before us. I want to note that the manifesto's fundamental message on a just energy transition is crucial. We are all working towards the same goals, achieving SDG 7 and clean cooking for all, but aligned with the goals and the targets of the Paris Agreement. So I think it's important that we're not debating solutions that can save people's lives, that support development, and that would have a negligible impact on carbon emissions. So I think it's really important to recognize that different countries are at different points on their development path, and that we have to embrace vastly cleaner solutions that can be deployed immediately. And then just another point to make is that we need to move beyond a focus on energy access and focus on energy for development. The upcoming UN high-level dialogue on energy that was also mentioned at the top is taking place this September. It offers a prime opportunity to continue building political buy-in and to continue raising clean cooking on the global agenda. But that attention has to turn into action, and it has to turn into resources. The high-level dialogue, I think, is an opportunity, though, to what we call be bold, to demonstrate that leaders not only care about the issue and the impact on people, but then they're actually willing to commit to specific actions and put adequate resources towards addressing the challenge. These commitments can be captured in energy compacts that are viewed as a key outcome of the dialogue. And the energy compacts are something now that the Secretary General has as a key ask for all member states. And these compacts and the actions that underpin them will be tracked year over year. A couple of other areas that really resonated for us: governments need to include clean cooking in their integrated energy plans. We can leverage the planning that's taking place on electrification, utilizing planned distribution channels, for example, for solar home systems, and layer planning on deploying clean cooking solutions on top of that. But we also need to address the data gap, and we need to invest in accurate and transparent data on where people are, as well as the usage data on technologies, on the fuels and the different stoves that are available. And while the private sector is key for reaching scale required to solve the problem, we also have to identify ways to build viable markets to support the companies and the entities get on the first and second rungs of developing successful business models. And that means providing subsidies and supporting, for example, through results-based financing, which is something that we think can be a faster and more efficient way to scale solutions. So there are many other areas that really resonate with us, but we're hugely supportive, and I will stop there with those initial highlights.
Very much, Tracey. And again, you've reminded us that there is a role here both for the private sector, but also for governments in helping to shape this market, in helping to shape a direction of policy and put political priorities. Thank you. I'm starting to again see some interesting comments coming in the chat. Beatrice has highlighted that there's a big gap between the requirements and criteria for international funding opportunities, so funders are prepared to come in, and the reality and the scale of social enterprises that might be involved in clean cooking, new types of stoves and others. So there's something that needs to happen there between bridging the local vibrant innovation and then the big finance that's prepared to come in and the kind of scale that needs to happen. So there I can see some issues that we might need to pick up on. Let me introduce the next person I'd like to bring in. That's Alessandro Galimberti, the Senior Technical Advisor for Climate Change at AVSI. Alessandro.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I just want to tell you, let me start by telling you what I'm experiencing now. I'm in Burundi and I spent these last 3 days in going around villages, of course, for monitoring our clean cooking project. And of course, as the people before me underlined, we are really far to achieve the universal access to the clean cooking. Villages here in Burundi, in the hills, are very far from the market, are very far from the grid. And so high-level partner before me underlined some objectives that I really appreciate. Our CEO, AVSI, is a proud member of the Clean Cooking Alliance. So our CEO said, use the objective holistic, and after it was used, we have to be serious, but we also have to be realistic, of course. And so, for sure, yesterday speaking with a colleague of mine from Burundi, she said that we can really not achieve this dramatic target without the engagement of the local government, as it was said. And what the government can say, the local government can say, first of all, I think the private sector and also has as NGO that work on the field, supporting sometimes them and also the demand. We really ask a government to implement a massive national awareness raising campaign at national level. This would be really helpful. Massive national campaign promoting clean cooking. And of course, we have to, the national government has to create a friendly environment, enabling environment for clean cooking, and not only for investment, not only for private sector, because I think that as Mr. Yumkella, sorry for the pronunciation, Prime Minister, said there's not only the supply, but there is a need of supporting the demand also. And so we really need also a friendly environment for consumer, for the user. And also national government could also promote a nexus, a synergy within this sector. It's normal. The health sector is the most affected, maybe, but there are many other sectors, urban planning, for example. I mean, clean cooking is a really cross-cutting item, and this synergy, these nexuses must be promoted and persecuted. And so our second contribution according to our experience is what about the vulnerable people, and how many million are there? What about the last mile? Is the task of the private sector to reach the last mile? And if we are speaking about a million of people, what should we do for these people? That's why I'm really happy about hearing about subsidy. I mean, for sure, the market-driven approach is the first best solution. But where you are confronted with a million of people, women, in a dramatic situation that have been experienced for the last 50 years, that it was underlined, maybe I'm just provocating, the market-based approach is a bit slow. We cannot wait the private sector. I can't see how the private sector can reach this yield in Burundi, for example. Neither so we can do something. We cannot let someone behind, no one behind. But these are many people these are millions of people that are the vulnerable, the last mile. And so we really have to do something for that, because a national government can maybe perceive and also calculate the cost of health care connected to intoxication due to indoor air pollution, for example. Again, a national government can also perceive and calculate the cost of the deforestation, and maybe to provide all the rural family with an improved cook stove or with access to clean cooking will cost much less, because it's a strategic investment. In Europe, the government had always replaced, or in any case, external aid had always supported strategic investments. So I don't see why we have to consider subsidies in some contexts. It's considered as a taboo. Okay, we have really to be realistic, and the situation is really dramatic. By the way, I'm really happy that LPG is included in the solution because again, not all the donors agree on that. So we really have to agree on clean cooking. We really have to be pragmatic and realistic. We really have to join all together to reach this imperative target, because there are too many people that are affected by this lack of access to the clean cooking. So I think that's it for my side.
Alessandro, for raising some of those points. And again, you've said some very practical issues that we need to address. Ladies and gentlemen, now's your opportunity. If you'd like to share your views or comments, if you could raise your virtual hand in the chat so I know who wants to come in and say things. If not, I will call on you because I've been seeing some interesting things in the chat. And I noticed there's lots of potential topics that we could pick up on. The thing that's come through to me very clearly is that we have an urgency. This issue needs to be addressed. We have, in addition to the urgency, there is a window of time. There is a opportunity here as we are going through a reset post-pandemic. A lot of new funds coming to the table to look at how societies can be restructured to be more resilient, and we need to clearly embed clean cooking within that societal resilience. We talked about shifting the frame from energy access to energy for development, seeing how critical it is for the well-functioning development of different societies. We also talked about the needing to also have new technologies, new innovation. There's space for this to happen, but we also need political commitment to be looking at this at scale. So I noticed there's a few people who have raised their hands who said they might like to speak. And the first person I will bring in is, I think we have Hanaan. Would you like to speak? Unmute yourself and go ahead, Hanaan.
Thank you so much. What we really see from our private company perspective, I work at Surf Gas, which is an LPG distributor in informal settlements in Kenya and Tanzania and urban areas, is that clean cooking is really at the intersection of two major features of life in many parts of sub-Saharan Africa. The first is, of course, increasing urbanization, where our clients are really driving up demand for charcoal for cooking, and that's driving deforestation. And the second is poor respiratory health, which we haven't talked too much about today, but in an era of pandemics, this is just likely to be more important than ever. And the second thing I wanted to note is that this manifesto calls for a just transition for all. And our clients in informal settlements are really choosing between fossil fuels. They have no, to scale anyway, no fully clean or renewable choice. So a just transition may provide for them. The next thing I wanted to mention is that, as I think it was Dymphna made the point, that our business, the clean cooking business, most aspects of it are regulated and taxed by governments. And so the role of governments in helping to make sure that clean cooking is the lowest cost solution is absolutely essential. And then the last thing I'll mention is that the private sector, even though there are many groups who are now more and more interested in clean cooking, as a private company, we see there are still many companies who say, you know, clean cooking doesn't fall within our remit. I'll close at that. Thanks so much.
Thanks for that, Hannah. And again, raising the point and very timely point that we are still not out of the pandemic phase, and it is a pandemic that affects respiratory health. And so clearly making sure that people have breathable air is going to be key as part of pandemic response as well. There's a few more people who I'd like to bring in and who want to say things. I'd like to bring in Samuel Adereki. You've raised your hand.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'd like to make an intervention at this point. My name is Samuel Adereki. I'm the Executive Director of the Development Foundation in Nigeria. And much has been said from Hanaan and Gbadegesin about interconnectedness of health and, of course, climate change. as it relates to clean cooking. So there's so much to do, leveraging the UN Energy Compact. And at this point, we should have commitments towards fostering relationship and collaborations for clean cooking. And if we must act, we need
Samuel, I'm sorry, the connection
be
is
more proactive
so
and
bad.
engaging together, and I think this is just a good way forward, and we can actually work together in developing local plans to make clean cooking solutions.
Samuel, I'm sorry, the connection is very poor. Can I invite you to put your comments in the chat, and we'll make sure they're shared. I apologise, but the connection is just very poor. Let me bring in Ed Brown. And then I'll be bringing in Patrick in a minute. But first, Ed.
Hi, thank you very, very much. Yeah, just wanted to say from the perspective of the UK-funded Modern Energy Cooking Services programme that we thoroughly support the manifesto, and in particular, the messaging around the potential of electric cooking. I think a couple of people in the chat and a couple of the commentators were suggesting the importance of innovation and also the importance of the urban as well as the rural. I really liked the point about different solutions in different places. And I think clearly we held a meeting last week which brought together a number of agencies that have really seen the potential of cooking with electricity. And in particular, I think because of the large amount of resources that are available to support the use of electrical infrastructure within this context that aren't currently being used for that purpose. So to thoroughly endorse, I think it was point 9 of the manifesto about bringing together the electrification and cooking agendas much more clearly than they have been in the past. So thoroughly support what's going on here. It's been a really good, fascinating discussion, and thank you for the opportunity to be involved.
Thanks, Ed, and your support and endorsement is, of course, very useful. We count on you all to act as champions and amplifiers of this message, bringing together clean cooking and the electrification agenda, making sure, I think, again, you've raised this point that you'll need different solutions for the growing urban sprawl, as somebody's mentioned, and also for rural areas, impoverished, quite remote ones, dealing with the last mile. Patrick, I noticed you wanted to come in, and then Cécile, you'll come in. Let's start with Patrick.
Thank you, Tamsin. I'm an investor in a company in Kenya called Cocoa Networks. I'm also the senior science policy advisor for an agroforestry research organization called World Agroforestry. And the reason why these two are connected is because this company found a way of using agriculture to transform cooking and turn it into a clean cooking solution. And what they bring to the table, which is unique, is that it is completely consumer focused, and their consumers are women of limited incomes in African cities. The business model is extremely simple. Go and talk to the woman to begin with to understand what matters to them. And while respiratory disease and deforestation matters to us as policymakers, what matters to them is two things. The cleanliness of the cooking solution, because unclean cooking solutions like charcoal means that the school uniforms of your children become dirty and you have to wash them more, which if you live in limited circumstances is a significant investment in time and money. And speed, because if you cook with charcoal, you have to wait 15 to 20 minutes for the fire to be hot enough so that you can cook on it. And when you're trying to get your kids ready for school in the morning, that's an issue. So the whole marketing is built on that. The second part of the marketing is to use the Gillette model. They sell a cooker which burns ethanol. The ethanol they get from an agroforestry system originally, and now from other sources. The cooker is sold at a loss. The ethanol is where they make the money. Where does the ethanol come from? The ethanol comes from something that looks like an ATM, which you find in hair salons in the big cities. Why hair salons? Because it's the one place that women go to sit back, relax, and talk to one another, where the men are not there to hassle them. The bottle that you have plugs into this ATM, you get your ethanol back. How do they get paid? Immediately through electronic payment systems like M-Pesa. When do they pay for their ethanol? 3 months later when their contract is due. So the business processes have been completely optimized, and the speed with which they're capturing clean cooking solutions is amazing. The current funding round is extremely large. They've been growing at speeds which we normally only expect from Silicon Valley app companies. And the reason they did that is because they were not focusing only on the problem of clean cooking, but they were focusing on the lives of the women who need a cooking solution and how to help them solve that while still making money. And that, to me, is the future of the clean cooking solution space. In the long term, yes, it's going to be electrified, because in the long term, we need to electrify everything. But right now, in the short term, it's by moving away from fossil fuels towards at least limitedly renewable resources like ethanol, and developing business models that have the consumers want these products, rather than business models that depend on some subsidy system to bring it out into the landscape. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Again, you've given us a very practical example of a solution that looks at the people who use it, what their needs are and what matters to them, how that works. Let me bring in Cécile to share your views.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the interesting meeting and having me invited to participate. Look, I think what I will take from this discussion is that it's certainly not an easy topic. It's very much context-based, and there's no one-fits-all solution. And you have to consider, obviously, when you talk of transition fuel, if a country will not create new dependency on LPG, if it pushes this kind of technology, if it's not a fossil-rich country, obviously. You will also want to consider the sustainability of ethanol and biogas and all these things. So I really think that the intervention to say we need to think of clean cooking as part of the energy plans is important, because it has to take all these aspects into consideration, the urban, the rural aspects, how much pressure you put on the forests, and indeed this long-term and I mean this short-term, long-term aspects that goes in the planning are a really important aspect. I will take the time to digest the manifesto in more depth, but one thing that I would like to really support is the electricity clean cooking. I think really, indeed, that's the long term, but decision taken now will have, I mean, we probably need to take decisions now in order to see the change by 2030 and beyond. And there's an effort done by the COP26 presidency to draw attention on super efficient appliances. Under the Clean Energy Ministerial, they are trying to revive a little bit this working group that focuses on trying to bring in our homes more efficient appliances. And what happens is that a lot of effort has been put on what we Western northern countries are using, fridges, and things like that, and we have really improved a lot the efficiency. What is missing is all the off-grid appliances. There is very little efficient electricity-powered off-grid appliances that would not drain too much microgrids and all. And I really think that, I mean, I really support this, the Commission really supports the SEAD. We are co-chairing this initiative, and we really feel that the COP26 Energy Transition Campaign has really done well in putting this on the agenda and bringing it up for the COP26 attention. And maybe you should find a way to slightly amend the manifesto to also consider this research efforts that has to be put on providing the right appliances for the African market, because mini-grids is certainly going to be the technology for a lot of access to electricity for rural areas, but there won't be enough qualitative appliances to power cooking, which is quite draining the system. Okay. So that's what I wanted to add. Thanks.
Thank you for sharing that, Cécile. And you I think highlight a point that Samuel made in the chat, because he was unable to get a connection that was functioning for us to work. And he's again highlighting the link that we can make to the UN Energy Compact to make sure that we're reaching for the higher ambitions to achieve our climate footprints, as well as impacting local economies. And he's again highlighted for us why it's imperative to work at the local and national planning, because as it stands, investments far outweigh the solutions that are available. So we need to increase the range of different options that we've got. we're coming towards the end of our time, and I've got one more person, Jeffree, who's asked for the floor before I bring back Dymphna, Sheila and Kandeh to close us off. So Jeffree, if I could ask you to be brief, let me pass the floor to you.
Okay, thank you so much for quite a very important debate, of which is something which affected me also when I was very young, and we've seen a lot of houses burning because of charcoal. But my thinking as part of transition is that we must also look at clean cooking and energy efficiency. We may, yes, move quickly to clean cooking, but I think because of how Africa is structured, it would be important to say, let's also have efficient ways, even if we are to use biomass. Let's have clean, efficient way of generating the heat for cooking, which is very important. Before we want electrification using electricity, but in terms of affordability and in terms of how the marginalized communities are dotted around some parts of Africa in particular, we may also say, let's have clean cooking efficient, or let's have efficient cooking methods that will be able to protect the environment also. Thank you.
Thank you for that, and for being very brief. And that allows us to come towards the end of our session. And if perhaps I could go in reverse order. We start with Kandeh and then Dymphna, and we close on Sheila. Kandeh, you presented at the beginning the manifesto. We've had a lot of support. We've had a lot of comments and suggestions. You know, where do you feel we are, and how can we activate this audience to create momentum for change?
We are at a point that is a dream for me, Sheila and Dymphna. 10 years ago, we were not at this point, but we see momentum building the last 2 years, and it's culminated now in this. Of course, it brings the challenge forward that our leadership, our eminent personalities need to take it the next level. 4 quick points. Let us not just make it a gender issue. That would be a mistake. For us, it is an energy access for development issue. It is broader than gender alone. But yes, we should look at deeper at the gender dimensions. Because in the past, when people have considered it a women's issue, they've kind of made it a charity case. No, it is an investment issue. The same way we dealt with electrification, good public policy, good markets, so that we can bring in large investments. We're talking billions of dollars. It is not good anymore to say, okay, every year we throw 50 million at this charity case. No, it is similar to electrification. It's about investments. It's about market development. It's about infrastructure. Finally, Patrick warns, I liked his point, new business models. He really made a good point there. And remember the ambition I said. For us, it is 40-60 by 2030. It gives you something we can measure, yeah, very clearly, and we'll be elaborating that also going forward. And we hope our eminent women will pick this up. The suggestion also about the first ladies, bravo. That's our next move. And we have one of our good ambassadors, Dymphna has been working with her very well, the second lady of Ghana, but we'll be working with Madam Ellen Johnson-Sirleaf and others, yes, to bring our first ladies the same way we brought the first ladies to deal with malaria, HIV, AIDS, and other diseases. So we're happy, but it's just the beginning of the big journey going forward. Thank you, Africa Europe Foundation, for picking this up and giving us the impetus we need now in the next 9 years to 2030 to really make a difference. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kandeh. Let me come to Dymphna, because you've been working on the Clean Cooking Alliance for years, and clearly this is something that it's an issue that's been kicking around for 50 years, and yet for the last 10 years, one of our speakers said that every year we've gone backwards rather than forwards. So it was probably quite a depressing place to work in the Clean Cooking Alliance before some new energy came into it. Do you feel that we've got the momentum that we need? Do you feel there's the energy behind it, and this is the decade we make it happen?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I've been with the organization 3 years, and I can definitely personally feel the shift that is occurring in the sector and the different focus it's getting, the different attention it's getting, the different people that are interested in it. and the different organizations. And today actually is quite an emotional day for me, and I'm sure for Kandeh and Sheila as well. Like, to have this level of attention to the issue of clean cooking has not happened before. And so I continue to be grateful and inspired by that attention that we're getting right now. I also continue to be inspired by the businesses out there. And so I want the audience to leave with this appreciation for the level of innovation that's actually happening right now with the businesses who are on the ground addressing this issue, both as they're thinking about technology innovation for the products and services they're designing and developing, but also for their business model innovation. And so there is a lot happening in this sector. It is an exciting sector to work in. It's going to continue to grow. It has many challenges, but I am convinced and inspired that we can overcome them, and specifically inspired by the women who are working on this issue. And I know we don't want to have it be an issue that's only considered to be a woman's issue, but I personally am inspired by women like Hanaan, who work so hard on addressing these issues within the businesses in which they're operating. And so I leave feeling incredibly inspired. Tamsin, thank you.
Thank you, Dymphna. Sheila, let me bring you back in, because, you know, the objective of the Africa-Europe Foundation was to see how we could create new stories of what Africa and Europe could do together. We aimed to bring political attention and focus to issues that matter, that weren't getting the attention that they needed. And right at the beginning, you were making the point that this is a huge issue and it wasn't getting the attention that it deserved, and we weren't getting either the funding or the support for the magnitude of the problem. So the Africa-Europe Foundation is very much behind this and throwing all of its network and its political support. What do you hope to achieve with your manifesto?
I think what I hope to achieve is what we've seen here today. I think we've seen a resounding buy-in and resounding drive for accelerated action. And just to paraphrase what Kandeh and Dymphna has said, indeed, this is not a charity issue, but this is an issue for a just and inclusive transition and an opportunity for Africa to accelerate much needed progress that we haven't done before. The aspirational manifesto that, in my view, this is an aspirational manifesto that indeed requires integrated planning at all levels and in all sectors. And it requires us to leverage the gains that we've made in modern energy, not just in modern electricity indeed, but in other areas and sectors as well. And to be bold and intentional to include cooking energy needs and demands. A new movement is emerging, and that's what I'm really excited about here. And as Dymphna says, we are emotional because we've been on this journey for far too long. But we see that a new movement is emerging, and indeed we're asking for our political leaders, we're asking political commitment, and we're also asking for the international community to take the opportunities that AVSI for All, for instance, had mentioned in the energy compacts and in the high-level dialogue in COP26, and indeed in our own summit in February. To really be bold, to be brave, to be intentional, and to be inclusive of what is an important agenda for those that are being left behind in our continent. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sheila. And again, it's exciting to see, you know, just the shift happen and to see what the potential can be. And the next 12 months are going to be critical on the international energy and development arena. There'll be a lot of big opportunities where the world leaders will come together to commit themselves to taking initiatives, to funding differently and new pathways forward for the climate. And what we're seeking to do is to make sure we can harness this energy and momentum that we've identified today to make sure that clean cooking is at the heart of those key conversations. Because this is a unique window of time, and it's an urgent issue that just needs to be dealt with. And we urge governments, we urge investors, businesses, stakeholders, NGOs, campaigners, anyone with a passion and time and energy to help make this happen, to take the manifesto, share it with your colleagues, endorse it, sign up, use it to generate the political momentum for change. So I'd like to say a warm thank you to all of our speakers from today, everyone who participated. It's been a really exciting and dynamic conversation. We thank you. This is only day 2 of a week of activities at the Africa-Europe Foundation. You can see on the screen now the upcoming events where you have an opportunity to hear more. We're going to be talking about cities. Today we talked about how fast Africa is developing cities and the importance of getting solutions right for people in urban environments. So we'll have a chance to touch on that in the next few days. So thank you all for joining us. Goodbye from the studio in Brussels.